It'll turn quite cold on Thursday night as well, and we're going to continue to have frosty mornings in the outlook. But with high pressure moving back in, not much rain in the outlook either, with many places staying dry into the weekend.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Tonight on Farage, it's Cummings v Boris. It's a fight for the Prime Minister's very survival. The question is, with their contradictory stories, who do you believe? I'll be joined here in the studio by the Ukrainian ambassador to London to discuss, is Putin about to invade the Ukraine? And joining me on Talking Pints, a winner of the Eurovision Song Contest. Seems almost inconceivable now, doesn't it? Yep, Jay Aston will be here. But first, before the show, the news.
Thank you, I'm Miranda Shunker. Your top stories this evening. Boris Johnson insists he believed a gathering in Number 10's garden during lockdown in 2020 was a work event. His comments come as his former chief advisor Dominic Cummings says he's prepared to swear under oath the Prime Minister lied to MPs about it. During a visit to a North London hospital today, the Prime Minister denied the claim but apologised for what he calls a misjudgment.
Nobody told me, and nobody said that this was something that was against the rules, that was a breach of the COVID rules, or we were doing something that wasn't a work event.
COVID restrictions brought in to slow the spread of the Omicron variant in Scotland will be lifted next week. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon announced nightclubs can reopen from Monday. There'll be no limits on numbers at indoor events and social distancing will be scrapped. But Ms Sturgeon warned people should still remain cautious.
The rise in cases driven by Omicron peaked in the first week of January, and that we are now on the downward slope of this wave of cases.
Police investigating the death of Ashleen Murphy have arrested a man in his 30s on suspicion of murder. Crowds gathered for the funeral of the primary school teacher today in County Offaly in Ireland. Irish Taoiseach Micheál Martin and President Michael D. Higgins both attended. The 23-year-old was killed while running along the Grand Canal in Tullamore. Police officers didn't have adequate first aid training at the time of the Manchester Arena bombing in 2017. That's according to an inquiry into the attack, which has heard evidence about the care gap, the time it took for the injured to receive treatment. Some officers at the scene hadn't received the recommended number of hours of first aid training, but Greater Manchester Police now say that the force is compliant. The Royal Navy will not push back migrant boats as they try to cross the Channel. That's according to a Defence Minister. James Heappey told Parliament the Ministry of Defence will take over command of operations from Border Force by the end of the month. But they will not be using controversial sonic weapons or turning boats back to France. And British #1 tennis star Emma Raducanu has won her first-round Australian Open match in 3 sets. The 19-year-old beat America's Sloane Stephens. She fought back from losing the second set 6-2 to win the third. Well, on TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News Now. It's back to Farage.
Good evening. Last night, just before we came on air, Dominic Cummings launched his most vicious attack on the Prime Minister to date. He made it perfectly clear that he and others had told the Prime Minister that the party, the Bring Your Own Bottle Booze Up party, should not go ahead, and that the Prime Minister had simply brushed it away. But he then made the most serious accusation you could possibly make against the Prime Minister, namely that he lied to Parliament. Now, Boris Johnson has responded to this today. He did an interview with Sky News. Let's have a look at a small section of it.
I do humbly apologise to people for misjudgments that were made, but that is the very, very best of my recollection about this event. That's what I've said to the inquiry. We'll have to see what they say.
Dominic Lawson wrote in the Sunday Times that as well you had been told by 2 officials it was a party and should be cancelled. You were dismissive. He writes, you said they were overreacting, said Martin Reynolds was your loyal Labrador. Is that also untrue?
Well, I've told you, and I repeat, I'm deeply sorry for misjudgments that were made.
Misjudgments.
And yes, because ultimately,
because it seems like you're trying
Beth,
to pass the buck and blame on
I carry full responsibility for what took place. But nobody told me. I'm absolutely categorical about this. Nobody said to me, this is an event that is against the rules, that is in breach of what we're asking everybody else to do, should not go ahead.
Well, I have to say, there's the Prime Minister saying he didn't know it was against the rules. But hang on, am I missing something? Wasn't it this Prime Minister who actually set those rules? And I think you could hear and see in that interview he was in considerable trouble. Now, the other question I guess to ask is, do we believe Dominic Cummings? Do we believe the man whose excuse for driving to Barnard Castle, a full 25 miles away, over that Easter weekend, that he was testing his eyesight? I mean, I don't think I've ever heard a more ludicrous excuse in the whole of my life. So do we believe Cummings, who clearly is motivated by negativity, motivated by bringing down the Prime Minister? It's not nice, it's not pretty, it's ugly. I have to say, on a personal level, I can't stand Dominic Cummings, and I've always found Boris, not always on politics, but in personal terms, one-to-one, a very pleasant chap to meet. But the stakes could not be higher. And it isn't just Dominic Cummings saying this. Indeed, there are senior journalists who spoke to others that were in Number 10 at the time who say Johnson was categorically told this party was a bad idea and that it was against the rules. And yet, he didn't say that to Parliament. He gave completely the opposite impression. This is now gunfight at the OK Corral. This is now the issue that will decide whether Boris Johnson can stay as Prime Minister or not. I'm asking you, who do you believe? Do you believe the Prime Minister or do you believe Dominic Cummings? Please let me know what you think. Farage at gbnews.uk. Now, can he survive? I'm joined by Darren McCaffrey, GB News' political editor. Let's just talk for a moment about the sort of machinations that have been going on in Westminster. Let's begin, Darren, with what's been dubbed the pork pie plot. Explain.
Indeed, and this is 2019, or MPs that were elected in 2019, who've been meeting, it seems, in various different parts of Parliament yesterday and today, in various different groups. They insist, or some of the people who've attended these meetings, not in a concerted attempt to try and remove the Prime Minister, but to essentially express their frustration. And it seems that a lot of them are frustrated and that they are thinking, if some of them have not already done so, sent in letters to the 1922 committee and to Graham Brady to remove.
And that needs 54 letters to
trigger. It needs 54. I think we're up to 7 now publicly to trigger our leadership election. So we're nowhere near in terms of the public figures. However, as we've seen in the past with Conservative leadership races, privately those numbers tend to be a lot higher. The best guesstimation at the moment is between 20 and 30, but in reality, no one really knows. And that's why things can change very quick. And things are pretty febrile at Westminster this afternoon. There is an awful lot of talk, as I say, about these meetings, about MPs who, far from being won over by the Prime Minister today, think that that interview again and the explanation was a mistake. Not least of all, I think, 2 things. First of all, it's the uncertainty about whether the Prime Minister essentially is telling the truth when it comes to whether he was told about the party or not. But second of all, and this gets down to the roots of, again, the anger after Prime Minister's question time last week. And to be fair, Beth Rigby put this to the Prime Minister, this almost ludicrous suggestion that the man who's drawn up the rules around lockdown is kind of taking us all for fools in the suggestion that he went to his own garden, so lots of people gathered around eating and drinking, and did not conclude instantly, or at least within the 25 minutes he was there, that this was a party and was wrong and potentially illegal. I mean, that's the frustration amongst MPs, that they just do not believe that that is at all plausible. And to add to all of this tonight, we're starting to see a bit of a civil war open up within the Conservative Party, potentially. And this hops back to the Owen Paterson affair, when there was that disagreement between the old guard Conservative MPs and the newly elected ones back in 2019. The Times reporting tonight that essentially some cabinet ministers are having a go at these newly elected Tory MPs, saying it's pretty sickening, this attempt, they say, to remove the Prime Minister. They're only there because of Boris Johnson. They only got elected because of him. And most of them are a load of nobodies. It's nuts. Now, is that really going to help? Is that really going to convince some of these MPs?
Well, no more than Jacob Rees-Mogg's comments about Douglas Ross, the leader of the Scottish Conservative Party, did. No, it doesn't. But let me ask you this. On his own, is Dominic Cummings a credible witness?
On his own, probably not. Certainly in the sense of public opinion. He is not very popular, and understandably so.
Deservedly so.
Yeah, and there are lots of people, I'm sure, watching this programme who will say, why are we believing a man who also came up with an equally ridiculous claim about why he broke lockdown rules in 2020, i.e. that visit to Barnard Castle and testing his eyesight. It seems as ludicrous now as it was at the time. The problem, I think, for the Prime Minister are 2 things. Dominic Cummings seems to still be suggesting he's got evidence. Also, I'm not entirely sure why he would go into this fight, particularly on a very public issue of record, which is very easily solvable or very easy to focus on, this idea that the Prime Minister's lying, if he didn't have that evidence. And I think, second of all, and you touched upon this, it's not just Dominic Cummings saying this too. There are other journalists, most notably Dominic Lawson, an eminent Conservative journalist, former editor of The Spectator, who wrote in the Sunday Times on Sunday, saying that he had heard that people had warned Boris Johnson about this party. And again, that is playing on MPs' minds. It's why they're concerned. How does this play out? Well, it is still entirely possible, of course, that the Prime Minister will find a pathway through this, that MPs will not move, that Sue Gray's report, and this could be crucial...
Which, by the way, Dominic Cummings has announced in the last hour that he is going to give testimony to.
Yeah, fascinating. And I think, even though, as I say, the atmosphere at Westminster is very excitable at the moment, slightly panicked as well, the view that I get from MPs is that there is unlikely to be that move in terms of the letters until we see the Sue Gray report. Most of them are prepared to stand back and wait for that. But, you know, flip me, considering Dominic Cummings is talking to her, she sounds pretty rigorous. We don't know what that report's going to hold. Another crucial moment, of course, will be PMQ's yesterday. And it is notable, and I say this because the reaction afterwards has been notable. the Prime Minister went to PMQs last week and apologised. It didn't go down well. He then went into hiding effectively for 6 days.
Then he comes out with an interview.
And it seems to have abated somewhat. And then he comes out today.
And it's bombed.
And almost seems to make things worse. And I think the concern, again, for MPs tomorrow what will happen to PMQs? And also, fundamentally, when and where does this end? And just very finally, even if, and it is entirely possible, let's not get carried away, it's entirely possible he may well hold on. But the big question is, can he recover?
Can he bounce?
Can he come back from all of this in 6 months' time, a year's time, or ahead of the general election?
Well, Darren, fascinating. And we're talking, of course, here about Conservative MPs. But what's going on with Conservative voters out there in the country? Well, joining me to perhaps help to answer that question is Professor Sir John Curtice, political scientist and Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde. John, good evening.
Good evening to you, Nigel.
As I say, I think so much of the media, so much of the debate is around what the 2019 intake think or what the old guard think. What's happening out there in the real world?
Well, the difficulty that faces the Prime Minister, I think, is that many voters made up their minds about this issue last month, in the wake of the original Partygate row about that now infamous video featuring his former press secretary, Allegra Stratton. At that point, around 2/3 of people said, frankly, we're doubtful that the Prime Minister is telling us the truth. That proportion hasn't declined, and it included about a half of those people who voted Conservative in 2019. And you've referred quite a lot to Dominic Cummings and Barnard Castle. Well, there's an important lesson here for ministers. In the midst of the Barnard Castle row, the Conservative ministers expended a lot of effort on trying to persuade people that what he had done was within the rules. Frankly, they failed, and indeed public opinion shifted further in the direction of saying that he'd broken the rules. And so far, at least, exactly the same thing is playing out over this Partygate row. The public started off being extremely doubtful, including a significant proportion of Conservative voters. And the truth is, the situation's just got worse. So whereas at the last year, towards the end of last year, we were talking about 50% or so of voters saying he should resign, and only a minority, albeit about a third, of Conservative voters saying that Mr. Johnson should resign. We're now talking about 2/3 of voters saying he should resign. And now, actually, on average across the polls, slightly more Conservative 2019 voters saying he should go than saying he should stay. Now, it has to be said, another poll, Conservative activists, only about a quarter think he should go. But of course, that's bound to be the last redoubt to support the Prime Minister.
Yeah, I mean, how activists in parties think and how voters think can be, as you say, very, very different things. I mean, Prime Ministers all through history have good times and bad times. I can think of perhaps Mrs. Thatcher's premiership, 1981, in very, very deep trouble with her own party, with Conservative commentators. But by 1983, it had turned around to a really quite dramatic election victory. And some would argue, John Curtice, that Boris Johnson himself, throughout his political career, has had all sorts of disasters, sackings, scandals, goodness knows what else. And every time, after a short period out, he's bounced back to even higher levels. What are the prospects of Boris Johnson being able to turn this opinion around?
Well, you're quite right. Prime Ministers have often been in trouble. His predecessor, Theresa May, was in very considerable trouble and became deeply unpopular. But what was the reason? The reason was essentially she could not unite her party behind the policy of Brexit she was trying to pursue. John Major was deeply unpopular. But why? Well, first of all, because of Black Wednesday, and then the fact that in the wake of that, his party was riven over Brexit. Gordon Brown was deeply unpopular. But why? Well, initially because he gave the suggestion he was going to hold a general election and then flunked it, and then, of course, hit the stormy waters of the financial crash. Now, the point about all those three, and one could think of others, you already cited Margaret Thatcher, is that these were all arguments and debates about policy, whether they were pursuing the right policies or perhaps a little bit about their political judgment. This, however, is a debate about whether or not the Prime Minister's personal ethics, integrity, probity, and honesty are to be accepted at face value or not. And in a sense, this is perhaps the reverse side of what has been Boris Johnson's great strength. His great strength, I think, as a politician has been somebody absolutely focused on outcomes, and in doing that has sometimes been willing to, shall we say, ride roughshod with some of the rules. Now, one obvious example, prorogation in September 2019, ruled unlawful by the UK Supreme Court. But at least half the country was behind him. Indeed, his popularity amongst Leave voters increased in the wake of that. And one can think of other examples with Boris Johnson, taking a risk with public money on vaccines. Equally, some debatable procedures for procuring PPE. But these were all things where at least a significant section of voters would be willing to say the end justifies the means. The problem in the last couple of months is that, first of all, with the Owen Paterson affair, which you recently mentioned, and now with Partygate, there isn't a constituency of people out there who thinks that the end justifies the means. With Owen Paterson, nobody thinks that life should be made easier for second MPs on their second jobs, and that therefore we should try to bend the rules over that. And as we learned from the Dominic Cummings affair, nobody thinks that those who are making the rules should be allowed to break them. So therefore, the strength of the Prime Minister, which is our willingness to bend the rules in order to achieve things, has arguably now become his Achilles heel, because now people are saying, hang on, he's breaking the rules, but for no good reason. And again, some of the fascinating focus group research that James Johnson, Theresa May's former post, has come out with, that people are saying, well, yeah, we thought he was personable, thought he was a bit of a character, but they're now saying he's a buffoon, and actually, perhaps, he's a liar. So as it were, people who viewed him through one prism now in these very different circumstances am I viewing through another.
I have to say,
some of his critics have always viewed him through.
They are pretty damning comments that came from that survey James Johnson did. So John Curtis, as ever, thank you for your analysis. Fascinating.
You're welcome.
It's all about trust, you see, folks. In a moment, I'll be joined by the Ukrainian ambassador to the United Kingdom. We'll talk about, is Putin on the verge of an invasion?
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I asked the question, who do you believe, Cummings or Boris Johnson? Deborah says, not Cummings. Obviously, I regret deeply backing him over Barnard Castle, and I bet Boris does too. Michelle on Twitter says to me, I don't believe either of them. Dorothy says, if Boris cannot understand COVID rules, which he drew up, he is not fit to be Prime Minister. Dean says, neither. It's a game. Cummings, Boris and the media at our expense and our kids' future. No, I promise you, this is not a game. It really isn't. Another on Twitter says to me, neither. One is a liar, the other is a politician. Still, who cares? There's more important things we need to deal with other than who or what possibly had a drink at number 10. Well, you may well think that. Let me tell you something that is actually very, very important. And that is the situation in the Ukraine right now. We've known for some time that Vladimir Putin has had tens of thousands of troops on Ukraine's eastern border. We also know there's been kind of a war going on there for many, many years. But there are some commentators now saying they believe that Putin is on the very verge of a major, major invasion. And I need to find out, is it really going to happen? And if it does, to what extent do we as a country get involved? I'm delighted that Vadim Pristyko, the Ukrainian ambassador to London, is here with me in the studio, and thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
So the troops have been massed, the Putin troops have been massed on the border for a considerable period of time. And I know the skirmishes are ongoing continually, and you've had people killed every month for the last, 5 or 6 years now? This has been going on? Almost eight. Just in the last 48 hours, there seems to be a change in the way some British and American commentators are looking at this situation. Is it your belief that Putin is about to launch an incursion into your country?
That's what we fear, that's for sure. And it's not just us, as you mentioned, that our partners in NATO and around the globe start to understand what we've been saying for so many years, that they are coming to something. They can't just sit there, shoot over the touchline. They will have to do something. They can't keep the thousands of troops at our border. And that's what we fear, that some people were missing. I hope, and I see it now, that it's coming to understanding.
Putin makes a point, and he's made a point repeatedly, and this is a difficult one for you, I think, a difficult position for you to be in. Historically, I think the West has tended not to understand Russia or the Russian mentality, or the degree to which Russia can be a slightly paranoid and fearful country. But the point Putin makes, which I have some sympathy with, is he says, if you keep advancing NATO to our borders, we see that as a threat, we see it as a possible encirclement. And isn't the truth, Vadim, that over the last decade and more, there have been repeated conversations between NATO and the Ukraine as to whether you should join. The European Union have been pumping money into the Ukraine, and indeed, when one of your presidents was brought down a few years ago, there were people in Kiev waving European Union flags. Do you not understand that actually the Ukraine, and I can understand, if I was Ukrainian, I'd want to join NATO. I get that. But from a strategic point of view, aren't the West making a bit of a mistake in trying to drag the Ukraine into their orbit?
If you consider West, the EU and NATO, but you're right, let's talk about NATO first.
Yeah.
Let me show our perspective. In 1994, we decided to give up the nuclear weapons physically to Russia because you requested. You, Americans and Russians, signed the agreement with us that we will defend it. There were no guarantees, but assurances. We didn't understand the difference in meaning of English words. We hoped that what we got at the deal, that we give up the weapons, which actually were more than you had France and China together. So your life was much more safer since then, since 1994. And we believed that you and the United States and Russia will not threaten us with anything, and will defend if anything happens to us, because we can't defend ourselves with nuclear weapons anymore. And look at us now, after all these 30 plus years, we're now in a sort of waiting until one of those ones who are signing will come to us, and the two of others who signed actually are not Russian to help us with this war. And you're right, we lost already 13 plus thousands of people.
Yeah.
So that's our perspective.
Yeah, no, I understand that perspective, but I also understand the Russian perspective. And historically, you know, British foreign policy in the past has used the buffer state concept. You know, Belgium was designed to be, in the end, the Germans invaded it, it caused a war. But so I do kind of understand what Putin, I'm not defending his actions, but I do understand that the ever constant eastward expansion of NATO is seen by many in Russia to be a threat, whether it is or isn't, but it seemed to be a threat. Now, overnight we learn that roughly 100 British troops have arrived in the Ukraine. We're helping provide you with more military equipment. If the situation on your eastern border does deteriorate, are you expecting us and the Americans to come and help?
Let's establish first that each and every nation has the right to defend itself unilaterally or collectively. That's in the UN Charter. So Russia has the concerns, we also have our concerns. And you mentioned historically. Historically, we also wanted to be protected. And we can be protected by a piece of paper, which signed, not just the one Budapest Memorandum I mentioned, but there are treaties between Ukraine and Russia, how they love us, how they recognize our sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the rest. So we understand that they consider NATO a threat. We consider NATO as the only option for us, the only umbrella, security umbrella. There is none in our part of the globe. So that's about NATO. Or talking about your presence on our borders, this 100 people came to let our people know better the equipment we just received yesterday.
Yeah.
So their mission is quite limited. They will go back. But frankly, as a Ukrainian who is under threat, and a 40+ million nation is under threat, I would ask all our partners to help with everything they can. And believe me, I should be modest, but I also expect any sort of help, boots on the ground as well.
Now, your own army is quite considerable in size, isn't it?
It's bigger, much bigger than it used to be. 250,000 plus 500 veterans who would easily take weapons back and defend the nations. So it's quite sizable army.
It's going to be, well, look, Vadim Pristakow, thank you for coming in. If there is an invasion of your country, it's going to pose some big problems here. You know, we've just left Afghanistan after 20 years and not left it very well. This is going to be a major debate, and listen, thank you for coming in, and we're going to follow this incredibly closely because it matters hugely. Thank you
very much.
Yeah, really heavy stuff. Now, on a slightly lighter note, my What the Farage moment are England's cricketers. Yes, we had a complete and utter disaster in the Ashes, losing 4-0. It wasn't very pretty. But then, our most senior players, James Anderson, our leading ever wicket taker, Joe Root, who is going to finish up as our most prolific run scorer of all time. They, at the end of the series, went out partying with 3 of the Australians, Nathan Lyon, Alex Carey and Travis Head. And they went out for a drink at the end of the Ashes series. The trouble was it wasn't really just a quick drink. In fact, they finished up at 6 o'clock in the morning outside their hotel, and somebody called the police. So the Hobart police arrived, and there are some out there saying that it's and those of you who are watching it on television can see the scene, and they do all look a little bit tired, and there are quite a few bottles of beer on the table, but they're not exactly being outrageous. They're not smashing the place up, and they're coming under condemnation. Many, many commentators are saying this is irresponsible behaviour. Senior cricketers shouldn't behave like this. Well, let me just have one word of sympathy for our cricketers and Australia's cricketers. Because of COVID rules, these people have been living in a bubble for the best part of 2 years. For most of the time, away from their families, away from their friends, and if they had the chance at the end of a long Ashes series to go out and enjoy themselves, and I think the fact that on the field, you know, they're deadly opponents, but they can get together and socialise, I think that's actually rather a good thing. Now, another point is, and this, I think, is very important, the Treasury. As soon as the pandemic hit, there were bounce-back loans, there were furlough schemes, there was money being doled out, and literally no questions asked. Well, we heard rumours of people buying brand new sports cars. We heard rumours of all sorts of fraudulent schemes. It now turns out, and this story broke yesterday, I'm absolutely stunned that it hasn't got bigger coverage today, although I guess with the Boris v Cummings battle going on, maybe it's not surprising. But the Treasury have now written off £4.3 billion of your money that was given out to fraudsters during the pandemic. £4.3 billion has been written off. Just think how many hospitals we could have built with that. And I have to say, for Rishi Sunak, this actually is a little bit of a disaster, because Conservative chancellors need a reputation of doing well their fiduciary duty in looking after our money. And I think Rishi has really got a few questions to answer. Now, what about some good news stories? There's too much negativity around. We were told all the way through Brexit would be an economic disaster for the country. Nobody would invest. It would all go wrong. Well, overnight, PwC have launched their 25th annual Global CEO Survey. It's a survey of 4,500 global CEOs across 90 countries, and they found the United Kingdom is more important in terms of growth prospects to CEOs globally than any other country. The UK has now overtaken China, particularly as United States company leaders' preferred target for investment for the next year. So we are, for the Americans, the biggest and most powerful economy in the world. We are now the number one place they want to invest and they want to do business. And this is all happening despite the government not actually taking advantage of Brexit in many of the ways they could. It just shows you what a great future we've got, and I really do mean that. Now, in a moment, the Eurovision Song Contest. I mean, I've had enough of these biased judges. I think it's time we withdrew. But there was a time when we used to do well. In fact, there was a time we used to win the Eurovision Song Contest. And one of those winners was Jay Aston, and she'll be joining me in a moment for Talking Pants.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, Talking Pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Well, the GB News pub is open, but tonight, actually, our guest is being served with a cup of tea. So, but you still, Jay Aston, can say cheers with your cup of tea.
Yeah.
And welcome to the programme.
Well, thank you very much.
Now, I'm just trying to picture this. You're 19 years old.
Yes.
And you're in a band, Bucks Fizz, and you go off and win the Eurovision Song Contest. It's like, let's have a look at winning the Eurovision Song Contest. Yep, I watched it live. It's quite a few years ago, isn't it?
It is. It's many. It's 40.
It's 40.
Yes.
But I'm just thinking, you're 19, and suddenly from obscurity.
Yeah, overnight.
It's overnight stardom.
Yeah.
And you're 19 years old.
Yeah.
Must have been an amazing feeling.
Oh, it was incredible. One of the best days of my life. Very hectic directly after it for a few years. But my brother did Eurovision the year before, and he was in a band called Prima Donna, and they came second. So I kind of knew what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And I was brought into a showbiz family. So when we were kids, we kind of had a bet, and we both wanted to win Eurovision when I was about 9.
Did you really?
Yeah. I don't think he's ever forgiven me, but yeah, my brother came second, so.
So suddenly stardom, and you had that hit record, you had other successes.
Yeah, it was huge hits, yeah.
And you sold how many? Millions of records.
Millions of records.
And you had fame.
Yeah.
How did you cope with that?
Well, I think I was a bit young, I have to say. I think Mike and Cheryl and Bobby, being that bit older, probably coped with it differently. But I had been brought into a showbiz family.
Yeah, you said. So
my dad was a comic. And so my whole childhood was, if I wasn't at school, I was on the side of a stage. Or we were, working on scripts or costumes or choreography or... So it was quite natural to me, and I was gigging when I was 14, going to school and then doing shows. So it was just a bit of fun, and I never really thought we'd win.
No.
3 minutes to change your life, that's what they said to you, and we did.
But that makes it even better.
Working off of it now, 40 years on.
But off the back of that, and selling, Land of Make-Believe and the things you did then, you should have made a fortune.
We should have.
What happened? What went wrong?
We had a terrible deal. We had a really bad deal. In fact, when we first met, we went to see a lawyer, and we couldn't afford a proper lawyer, so we went to Equity, our union.
Yep.
And the guy there read the contract and went, it's not very good. It changed like one or two things. But then when I left the band years later, we found out that he wasn't a proper lawyer. So we signed this contract, which looked like it could run for sort of 2 or 3 years, but it had the potential to run for 20 years. So your whole career.
Yeah.
On a 3-minute song. And so, yeah, it was... But, it was still a wonderful experience.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it was. And it was all going wonderfully well, and you were touring the country.
Yeah.
And then the first of several things I think that we share in common in terms of life experience.
Yeah.
There's an horrendous crash, isn't there?
Yes, absolutely. That was terrible. Christmas 1984, we just started a tour. It was the second night, and we were in Newcastle. And the next night, we were meant to make it to Wembley. Never made it to Wembley. So on the way back, we're just going back to the hotel after the gig, sold-out tour, and we hit this lorry. And it had steel on it, so it was literally like hitting a wall. And Mike Nolan was particularly badly injured. Most of the roof came off of the vehicle. Mm. And so many of the musicians were hurt as well. And it changed our lives. In fact, it was that really made me decide to leave the band. Because there was always friction, you see, but within the band. And it just felt like someone was saying, that's the end, it's finished. Mike Nolan had the last rites read over him, so I couldn't see a future. And he was terribly badly injured, and it's taken him decades, really, to recover. But he has done an incredible job, he is quite remarkable, and we're still gigging, so... But it was tragic.
So literally, the world's going wonderfully well, and suddenly it's a disaster. You said there were frictions within the band before the crash, but there are frictions in every band, aren't there?
Well, always, yes. We were a manufactured band, one of the first, and that has its problems. And the thing is, Mike and Cheryl were very close, and Bobby was that bit older, and they would always disagree, and I would be the floating vote. So I think with all bands, it's difficult, and it's also the workload you're dealing with, and all the travelling and all of that, and the egos, of course.
Yeah, which is going to happen. But bands can still get on. I mean, they can still go on for years and years and years, despite those difficulties and despite those tensions. But this was a very, very dramatic end for you, and you were lucky, perhaps, not to be more seriously hurt, frankly.
Yes, I mean, I hit. It's a silly story, but I always say Tangerine saved my life. I was sat at the front of the van of the coach, and I wanted to go up the back to the loo, and there was this fruit rolling about. So I picked the fruit up because it was all going on the sort of over on the side. And as I picked the fruit up, I saw my manager and I went, "Oh, can I have a word?" And I heard someone say, "We're going to hit that." And so literally, if I hadn't literally been tidying, I would have been in a different position. I'd have been up the front, or I'd have been in the bathroom area where the main girder of the coach would have literally gone right straight through me. So it's all those split-second decisions that change your life.
Bits of luck. That amazing 3 minutes that you had, and you weren't the only British people ever to win it. But, I mean, Eurovision now, I was joking in the intro before the break, I think we should leave. It's time to leave the Eurovision Song Contest. But, I mean, it would appear, even before Brexit, that a lot of countries out there just don't like us. It doesn't seem to matter how good or bad the British act is. The vast TV audience, I mean, and I used to tune into it every year, and, you know, when Terry Wogan was doing it, he was absolutely
He was brilliant. I really miss him.
And a lovely sense,
Wonderful man.
Delightful man.
Yeah.
Delightful man. But we're doing, I mean, the whole thing's rigged against us, isn't it? We've got no more chance in Eurovision than we had in the European Union.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that. I mean, there's always been political voting, and because there's so many different countries now, you know, there's so many different tastes and flavours. So I think it's very, very hard to win that competition. And I think what we're doing is wrong if we don't make enough effort.
We're coming last.
Oh, it was horrendous. I was so embarrassed. I was so like, how can we come last? I mean, but we obviously aren't putting in the right thing. We're not putting in the right song and the right artist. And I do think we could do better. I don't think we could win, but I do think we could end up on the right side of the leaderboard.
Well, it seems to me for the last few years, the political voting has been extraordinary, loaded against us in the most ridiculous way. I mean, I just think we're whistling in the wind with it. But you still think that we should pursue it?
I really think anything that brings that amount of people together to listen to music and have a bit of fun and enjoy themselves, I think it's a good thing. I think it's a positive thing.
But it's making the country angry.
I think loads of people still love it. I don't think we should pull out, really. I just think we need to put in a good song. And I've actually got a confession to make. I've put a song in this year.
Right.
I don't know what's going to happen.
OK.
I just thought, why, you know, because I often go on and say, look, we're not doing well enough. So I tried to write a song and tried to come up with a concept. And I've entered it, but I have no idea what will happen with it. Okay. It might not see the light of day.
Well, when it comes to the Eurovision, you're clearly a Remainer.
Yes, totally. But wasn't on Brexit.
But when it came to the European Union, you were very much a leaver, weren't you?
Yes, indeed, I was. I wasn't happy being told that we made a mistake when there.
So is that what politicised you?
Well, no. I mean, I just thought I wasn't happy with the way things have been going for quite a few years. But ultimately, it was about democracy, wasn't it? You know, you can't really lose that.
And that's why you got involved with the Brexit Party, because of that, to sort of get it back on course.
You know, a lot of people don't like me for doing that, and it wasn't, you know, it's a very divisive whole situation. But what I thought ultimately, you know, I haven't been happy with things that have been going on for years, but ultimately, if you have a clear winning side and then you tell them you've got it wrong, vote again, try and overturn that.
It was disgusting, wasn't it?
I thought it was just wrong.
Yeah. I think, Jay, I think we'll look back in 100 years' time over that period between 2016 for the next sort of 3.5 years as being one of the most shameful periods of our democratic history. I mean, I really, really do. And how do you see it now with Boris?
Ooh. I really don't know how he's going to get out of this one. People are really upset. They're really... I think they're a bit dumbfounded that there was obviously a rule for them and a rule for us. And there's a lot of anger on the streets. I mean, people have been through an absolute nightmare. They've lost their businesses. I've personally lost 2 cousins and a good friend, and I couldn't go to the funeral. And then you sort of think, they're having a party at that time.
And that's where the anger is.
And it's understandable, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's that. And I think it's also a feeling we're not being told the truth. You know, rather than when they're caught putting their hands up, they're just not doing it. So there is a lot of anger out there in the country, a lot of frustration. And you've had, you said you lost family members, but you've had your own health issues, haven't you, over the
Yeah.
last couple of years,
Yes.
which, again, rather like me, another thing we have in common, you've had a battle with cancer.
Yeah. It was 3 years ago now. I was just having a routine dental check. And a few years before I got ill, I had this sort of white little patch come up on my tongue. And it was literally a regular check. And they were kind of keeping an eye on it, but suddenly it changed. So it went from pre-cancer, from one biopsy to cancer in just 3 weeks. So that's why they've had to do a much bigger operation. So they've removed the bottom of my tongue. They sort of went in here and they took a piece of my leg off.
Gosh.
So that's... But it did run a marathon, so I'm hoping it'll be pretty good in the future. But yeah, I've had to learn to sing and talk, obviously. And it's been a bit of a long recovery, longer than I anticipated. But I'm here, and
Yeah, you're looking well.
I'm enjoying life, and it does change you having cancer. I'm sure you had the same.
Yeah, I was very young. I was 21 when it happened to me, but you know, I mean, it does make you a lot more thoughtful.
Yeah, it gives you a different perspective.
As a person, so you've got through that, and then you had a bad attack of COVID, I understand, as well.
Yes, I did. Well, my daughter got it, but she didn't really have symptoms, and then my husband got it terribly. I was very worried about him, and then I caught it. And of course, I was only just, you know, fairly soon after recovery.
You were obviously weakened in a sense, weren't you, I guess, by what you'd been through before.
Yes, I think I think if anyone's had cancer, they do struggle with energy. So it's always been that my energy, I have to be really careful about what I do.
Horrific. And from the sounds of it, the operation you went through was a really, really major operation.
Yeah, it was 7 hours. Yeah.
Gosh.
And my surgeons, though, I mean, they're amazing what they can do today. So I thank the good old NHS.
Yeah, but they're so... I mean, we've got 6 million people now waiting for operations.
Yeah.
People who've got money going
effect.
privately.
Yeah.
I mean, it is very, very difficult indeed, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're overrun. They need... I mean, it's always... There's always been a problem with the NHS, one thing after another. And then, obviously, this has just been horrendous.
So you've got a song in for this year's Eurovision. You're back to health. So what next?
Oh, well, the Fizz recorded a new album, which is our fourth with Mike Stock, producer from Stock Aitken and Wootton. And we're just awaiting the final mixes. So it's quite an eclectic mix, so it should be quite an interesting album. So we'll be promoting that. And we're going back to gigs. They're coming back. And that tour that we had to cancel, which was ironically called Up Close and Personal.
Right.
Went, of course, but now we're just trying to... The ones that survived, anyway, the gigs that weren't cancelled, so we're just finishing that tour.
Right, well, as I say, you know, major road traffic accident, cancer, Brexit party, our daughters were at school together. Jay Aston, we've got quite a lot in common. Big thank you to you for coming in and joining me.
Oh, my
Talking
pleasure.
Pints.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are coming towards the end of the show, but of course, as ever, you fire in your questions to me under the Barrage the Farage section. One viewer asks me, why do you think someone has waited nearly 2 years to release the information about the Downing Street party? Well, that's a question very much about Dominic Cummings, about his personality. You know what they say? Revenge is a dish best served cold. And that's exactly what Cummings is doing. He is a scheming, calculating individual. I don't for one moment doubt his intelligence. And yes, he's been saving this up for the right moment. He did not feel, and it wasn't just Barnard Castle. The one thing about Cummings I liked is he thought the civil service had too much power in this country and they were stopping government from making the kind of reforms and changes that are needed. But he feels that Boris Johnson did not back him up in that very, very important battle. And frankly, he's been out to bring the Prime Minister down ever since that moment in time. It is ugly, it is unpleasant, there's nothing nice about this at all. And yet, at this gunfight at the OK Corral, as I see, between Cummings, who's the Wyatt Earp, and Boris, who's the sheriff, I have to say, however much I may dislike Cummings, I suspect his account of what took place over that party is the right one. And I think because of that, he's probably going to win this, and the Prime Minister's in real trouble. Robert asks, with the Russian army massing on the Ukrainian border, Chinese spies infiltrating Parliament through the Labour Party and COVID, do you think too much time is being spent on Boris Johnson's petty transgressions? If he's found to have lied to the House of Commons, that is not a petty transgression. And as Jay said, after the miserable time people have been through, the thought that those that made the rules did not apply them to themselves, that is not petty. What I would say, with all the things happening in geopolitics around the world, what the hell are we putting the Royal Navy into the English Channel to pick up migrants and bring them into Dover for? That really is mad. Alan asks, is an apology from Boris now meaningless? You know, I think people in life have great respect for those who get caught out, put their hands up and say, I'm sorry. I think people who do that often win a much broader audience. I think it's too late for Boris to apologise now because he's just denied. And you've heard him again tonight saying he thought it was within the rules. He set the blooming rules. And then to say he thought it was a work event. Well, it was a bring your own bottle booze up. And by all accounts, dozens of people were there. There were vast tables of drink. I mean, the whole thing's nonsense. Jack asks, do you think Silvio Berlusconi has a chance of returning as Italy's president? Well, I knew Berlusconi because in my first years and my last years in the European Parliament, he was a member of that parliament. And there he was, in his 80s, the disreputable Silvio Berlusconi. He never, ever gives up. I have to say, I didn't know him that well. I never got invited to any of his parties, or Boris Johnson's. I don't think he's a credible figure to be Italy's president, and I don't think it's going to happen. Last one, a viewer asks, do you think it's time that all veterans of the armed forces were given a medal of recognition for service? One of the nicest things we could do in this country, and we should have done it years ago, is to issue a medal for those that did national service, for those that have served this country, so that when they attend the November the 11th memorial services, they've got something to wear that recognises their contribution. A national service medal would not cost a great deal of money and make millions of people and their families very happy indeed. That's it from me. Coming up next, it's Patrick Christie's. First, though, it's the weather.
Good evening. A bit of rain around tonight and tomorrow as a band of wet weather moves southwards. Behind it, brighter skies will follow, but also we'll see a cold wind starting to increase. The winds have been pretty light recently thanks to high pressure, but weather fronts are slowly edging in. Been bringing some rain across western Scotland and Northern Ireland through the afternoon, and that wet weather will continue to trickle southwards. We'll see a little bit arriving across the far north of England through